As the moon cast its silvery light upon the sleeping town, I found myself standing in front of a familiar building, my heart pounding in my chest. The once familiar scent of lilacs and honeysuckle that usually filled the air had been replaced by the musty odor of damp earth and crushed leaves. The night was cool and a gentle breeze caressed my exposed skin, sending shivers down my spine. I took a deep breath, mustering up the courage to face whatever lay ahead, knowing that there was no turning back now. I raised my hand and gently rapped on the oak door, my knuckles white from the effort. A faint light flickered behind the curtains, and after what seemed like an eternity, they parted, revealing the stern face of my wife, her eyes narrowed in disapproval. She was dressed head to toe in black, her usually elegant gown replaced by a stiff, unyielding corset that hugged her body like a second skin. In her hands she held a long, sinister-looking cane, its tip glinting menacingly in the dim light. "You're late," she hissed through clenched teeth, her words carrying a chill that went straight to my bones. "I was beginning to think you weren't coming." Without another word, she motioned for me to enter. I hesitated for a moment before stepping across the threshold, my heart pounding even harder now. The warm, familiar living room had been transformed into a makeshift dungeon, with various implements of punishment hanging from the walls and laying scattered about on the floor. I shivered, feeling more exposed and vulnerable than ever before. "Close the door behind you," my wife ordered, her voice cold and unforgiving. I obeyed, shutting out the world as I did so, sealing my fate within these walls. As I turned back to face her, I couldn't help but wonder what she had in store for me tonight. It was no secret that I had been crossing the line more often lately, succumbing to my dark desires as a crossdresser. She knew about my secret life, and she had made it clear that she would not tolerate such behavior. Now I was about to pay the price for my transgressions. I tried to calm my racing heart as I surveyed the outfit she had chosen for me. It was a revealing ensemble that left little to the imagination. A tight, lacy red corset that pushed my ample breasts together and emphasized my curvy figure, a matching thing that left my bottom completely exposed, and a pair of high-heeled sandals that made my ankles ache just from standing. The corset forced my chest out and my waist in, drawing attention to my feminine curves while also making it difficult to breathe. I fought the urge to loosen it, knowing that any resistance would only earn me a harsher punishment. My wife must have seen the fear and uncertainty in my eyes, for she smirked cruelly. "Do you like your new outfit?" she asked mockingly. "It's not quite as pretty as your usual clothes, but I think it suits you just fine." She paused for dramatic effect before raising the cane above her head. "Now let's see if you've learned your lesson." With that, she brought the cane down across my exposed backside, sending a searing pain through my body. I cried out in agony, tears streaming down my face as she continued to rain down blows upon me, each one harder than the last. As the pain intensified, I could feel my cheeks burning with shame. Not only was my wife dominating me, but the sounds of our punishment echoed through the house, carrying outside into the night. I closed my eyes tightly, willing the pain to subside, as I became acutely aware that our moans and cries were no longer confined within these walls. Neighbors must be hearing us, their curiosity piqued as they wondered what sort of depravity was unfolding behind closed doors. My wife continued to punish me relentlessly, her breath hot against my ear as she hissed insults and threats. Despite the agony I was in, a small part of me couldn't help but feel aroused by the power she wielded over me. It was a twisted sort of pleasure that I knew was wrong, but it was impossible to ignore. I clutched at the lacy fabric of my corset, trying to find some small measure of comfort amidst the chaos. After what seemed like an eternity, my wife finally lowered the cane, her chest heaving from exertion. "That's enough for now," she growled, her voice hoarse from shouting. "But remember, this is just the beginning. You have a long road ahead of you if you ever hope to earn your way back into my good graces." With that, she turned on her heel and disappeared into the darkness of another room, leaving me alone to contemplate my fate. I collapsed to the floor, curled up in a ball, and sobbed in misery. Time seemed to slow to a crawl as I lay there, the events of the night replaying over and over in my mind. I couldn't believe what I had done, what I had agreed to. But it was too late now. I was trapped in this twisted game, and there was no escaping it. As the hours ticked by, I could hear the distant sounds of neighbors stirring, their curiosity finally piqued. I wished I could disappear, become invisible, anything to avoid their judging gazes. But I knew that wasn't an option. I was their entertainment for the night, their reminder that no one was above punishment. Just as I began to lose all hope, I heard a soft knock at the door. My heart leapt into my throat as I realized who it must be. It was her, my neighbor. The one who had heard our punishment through the thin walls of our homes. I could feel my face flush with shame as she stepped inside, her expression a mixture of shock and arousal. She closed the door behind her and slowly began to approach, her eyes never leaving my body. My wife, who had been watching from the sidelines, smiled cruelly. Well, she drawled. Look who's come to see what all the fuss is about. My neighbor's cheeks flushed even deeper as she realized she had been caught eavesdropping. I am sorry, she stammered. I didn't mean to intrude, but I couldn't help but hear what was happening. My wife circled around her, trapping her against the wall. And what did you think, dear? She purred. Was it as hot as you imagined? My neighbor glanced over at me, her eyes burning with desire. She swallowed hard before answering. Yes, it was. She paused, gathering her courage. I've always fantasized about being dominated like that. My wife smiled, a predator smile that sent a shiver down my spine. Well, why don't you join in the fun? She suggested, motioning toward my still sore body. I'm sure we could all use another pair of hands. My neighbor hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward. With shaking hands, she reached out and gently caressed my cheek. The touch sent waves of pleasure through me, despite the pain I still felt. She leaned in closer, her lips brushing against my ear. I've wanted this for so long, she whispered before pressing her body against mine. My wife nodded in approval, a satisfied smile playing at the corners of her mouth. As my neighbor began to touch me, exploring my body with eager fingers, I could feel myself growing hard again. It was a strange and twisted sort of pleasure, knowing that these two women were using me for their own gratification. They took turns spanking and teasing me, their moans and gasps filling the room, drowning out any remaining semblance of modesty or decency. Finally, my neighbor climaxed, her body shuddering against mine as she released her pent-up desire. She leaned back, panting heavily, and regarded me with a satisfied smile. Thank you, she breathed. That was incredible. My wife chuckled darkly. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Now why don't you help us punish him properly? And with that, the two of them began to work in tandem, their combined strength and dominance leaving me helpless and exposed. As the night wore on, my shame and humiliation grew deeper with each passing moment. But there was something else there as well, a strange and intoxicating mix of pleasure and power that I couldn't deny. Perhaps I thought as I lay there, battered and bruised, this was my new reality. Maybe this was what it meant to be truly owned, truly dominated. And maybe, just maybe, I was starting to enjoy it. My wife's neighbor, her new partner in this twisted game, continued to explore my body with an almost clinical efficiency. She seemed to know just where to touch me, just how hard to spank, and when to stop. I could feel myself growing hard again, despite the pain and exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm me. It was as if some primitive part of me was responding to their dominance, craving the release and the control that they so effortlessly wielded. My wife, observing my reactions with a knowing smile, stepped between us. She placed her hand on my shoulder, guiding me onto all fours. I felt her fingers trace a trail down my spine before slipping beneath the waistband of my boxers. Time for a little reward, don't you think? She purred, her breath hot against my ear. I could feel her wetness against my ass as she positioned herself behind me. The sensation of her pushing inside me was almost too much to bear, but I gritted my teeth and endured it. She began to move, her hips meeting mine in a rhythm that was both brutal and strangely tender. My neighbor watched from the side, her hands braced against the wall for support as she watched our coupling unfold. As my wife's movements grew more intense, I felt a sudden surge of power coursing through me. I arched my back, pressing myself deeper into her, meeting her thrust for thrust. I opened my eyes and looked over at my neighbor, feeling a newfound confidence and dominance welling up inside me. Do you want to turn? I asked her, my voice rough with desire. Come here and show me what you've got. My neighbor hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward. Her hands shook as she undid her clothes, revealing her own aching need. She climbed onto the bed, straddling my legs, and lowered herself onto me. I felt her warmth envelop me, and I groaned aloud, lost in the sensation. The three of us moved together now, a dance of lust and control that seemed to have no end. As the night wore on, the lines between pleasure and pain, dominance and submission, began to blur. I found myself wondering if this was what true intimacy looked like, if this was what it meant to give oneself over completely to another. Perhaps in some twisted way it was. And perhaps I thought as I collapsed, spent and satisfied, back onto the bed, I had finally found my place in this world.